Today, it is my honor and delight to introduce one of the most remarkable and unique voices of the 20th century. Fairly well known in his time, a powerful speaker, one of the most intelligent and educated of the modern era. He spoke with such grace and power that he is compared to the greatest orator of all time. This was not Seneca or Cicero, but the 4th century John Chrysostom, the golden-tongued patriarch of Constantinople, who, when he preached, the entire city emptied its streets and shops, and everyone went to hear. Nikolai Velimirovich of Serbia was like that. What we are searching for in our ruminations is unusual inspiration. And when Nikolai Velimirovich spoke, he took his listeners by surprise because they had never heard a power of inspiration like this before. Nikolai was born in rural Serbia during the troubled period at the end of the 19th and beginning of the 20th centuries, just as Serbia was emerging as an independent nation. He was born of noble ancestry, but that only meant that his parents were peasant farmers who owned a little land. Because, since the Battle of Kosovo in 1389, Serbia had been under Ottoman domination, and since Serbia was a Christian nation, like all lands of the Byzantine Empire conquered by the Muslims, the people were oppressed and marginalized. They were not allowed access to education, prosperity, or social advancement. Their only hope was to convert to the Islamic faith, and then they could have social advancement. But this required denying the divinity of Christ, and the people of Serbia chose not to do this. Their centuries under Islamic domination were a strong contrast to what had been, because Serbia had been a great nation under the influence of Byzantium. Saint Sabas, the first Archbishop of Serbia, would have become king had he not fled to Mount Athos to become a monk. This is Saint Sava of Serbia in a fresco in Serbia. His father later renounced his throne and joined him on Mount Athos, and together they founded the Hilandar Monastery on Mount Athos, one of the most important monasteries on the Holy Mountain. Together they built the Hilandar Monastery, and then this family began a royal lineage where most of the kings became saints. And by the way, this isn't that unusual. For example, a high percentage of Saxon kings became saints, as did dozens of rulers in the Kievan period in Russia. And when the Saxon royal lineage was driven out of England at the Norman conquest, they went to Kiev and married into the line of Yaroslav the Wise, the son of Vladimir the Great. Now, secular historians will tell you that it was really for political reasons that the church canonized these kings and queens. But if you follow the line of inquiry that I'm suggesting, that sanctification is the reason for human existence, you will discover a history that you did not know existed. This is what medieval Serbia was in the early medieval period. It developed its own very rich Orthodox culture, its own literature, with some of the best libraries in Europe, its own style of temple building, its own chant system. As poor and beaten down as the Serbian people were after 5 centuries of domination, they were still aware of their history. This was kept alive by an underground movement, as it were, of poets. This illiterate culture of heroic epic singers learned and recited tales by heart. They accompanied themselves on the guzle, which is a sort of single-stringed fiddle played with a bow. Here is the singer playing the guzli. This is a native Serbian bard. This is actually really important because this movement of poets came to the attention of scholars later in the century, and the studies of these native bards laid the foundation for our understanding of oral lore and its transmission. It revolutionized the study of Homer, and I want to say more of this later. So these poets fueled a feeling of the people for their heritage, and this led finally to Serbian independence in the 19th century. Serbia was just gaining its feet when World War ripped through Europe. And with so many larger nations at war around them, the history and interests of the little Balkan countries was little understood in the West. The West never had much sympathy for the Orthodox nations of the East anyway, and certainly never understood the Byzantine heritage that was so important to them. So Nikolai was chosen to be an ambassador to England and to America. His education, by this time, was really remarkable. Even in a nation that was mostly illiterate, his education was so thorough that he was actually the spark that ignited a new generation and a new kind of learning that he represented. His education began in the monastery near his home, where he was known even as a boy to get his hands on any book, escape to the bell tower, and read. Later he went to the village school, and then on to the seminary of St. Sava in Belgrade. Besides liturgical and theological studies, Nikolai began reading Shakespeare, Voltaire, Nietzsche, Marx, Pushkin, Tolstoy, Dostoevsky, and others. His favorite was Peter Njegoš, a Serb and Montenegrin poet, one of his ancestors actually. And his final examination was a discourse on the poetry of Njegoš, which took his own professors by surprise. This is one of Njegoš's long poems. It's sort of an epic poem, ascending into the cosmos. It's really beautiful. Nikolai was sent to the old Catholic Theological Seminary at the University of Bern in Switzerland. It was considered that this old Catholic environment was closer to orthodoxy than others. He also studied in Germany and in England. He was exposed to the finest education Western Europe had to offer. He read the spiritual and philosophical books of ancient India. His learning and the profound depth of his thought were considered unique. He was a treasury of wisdom and spirituality. His doctorate in theology from Bern was a dissertation written in German. Faith in the resurrection of Christ is the foundation of the dogmas of the Apostolic Church. He obtained a doctorate in philosophy from the University of Oxford in England, and then back in Geneva, Switzerland, he wrote a second doctoral dissertation, The Philosophy of Berkeley. This was written in French. This was only the beginning. He also went to St. Petersburg and studied theology there, and throughout his life, he continued to collect honorary doctorates. And everywhere that he went, he observed all he could about the people and the culture. So this is why he was chosen to be an ambassador to England during World War I. And his brilliant speeches and his entire manner of virtuous sobriety stood out, and newspapers took note. His talks filled churches and town halls, and was very effective in changing popular opinion. This is how he appeared as a young man when he was an ambassador. Serbia lost more than half its male population in World War I, and yet it contributed significantly to the Allied victory. So he was sent to England, and he arrived in Hyde Park, knowing no one, and he took out his shepherd's pipe and began to play. Now, I don't know if you can imagine this scene. A young man in black robes, looking like maybe an Indian ascetic, except with a big cross on a chain around his neck, and playing a shepherd's pipe. And so people began to gather around and listen to him. And then he began to speak. This pipe is played by a people of whom you have heard only evil. I want you to know that on the field of Kosovo in 1389, King Lazar and his entire army died, wiped out by the Muslim advance, and yet they stopped the Muslim advance into Europe. At that time, there were as many Serbs as there are Englishmen now. What happened to them? They died, defending their country and the rest of Europe. In this talk and in subsequent public talks that became so popular, they filled Canterbury Cathedral and St. Paul's Cathedral in London and St. John the Divine Cathedral in New York City, also civic and university auditoriums. He showed his gift for understanding and appealing to the best instincts of people, and to call them gently and powerfully to fulfill these instincts. Like this: what is the greatness of the British Empire, the greatest empire on earth at this time? This was during World War I. The greatest even since the beginning of history. Many will say, but these are short-sighted people, its aim is the exploitation of every other country under the pretext of civilization. No, its true aim is larger than the selfishness of any person or nation. And he began to speak of the exchange of spiritual goods among all peoples. And he listed the positive qualities of Eskimos, Indians, Persians. He mentioned the writings of Rabindranath Tagore, in order to experience the realization of brotherhood among all races. It is easier for an Indian to become a British citizen than ever it was for a foreigner to become a Roman citizen. He called England to take care for the education of all nations. He always believed in the value of good education, and he demonstrated this constantly in himself. Then he pointed out that Serbia, at the time, was the only successful democracy among all the Slavs, and he appealed to the British to help Serbian democracy survive, buried as it was under the German and Austro-Hungarian advance of World War I. What is Serbia? A tiny country with a great soul. England, as a champion of democracy, has a responsibility to save it. After all, England gave us Shakespeare. I do not know Shakespeare. Even I cannot know him. But he knows me. He described me. He painted all the secrets of my soul in such a way that in reading him, I am finding myself in him. Shakespeare knew, and the British nation, being educated upon Shakespeare, know, their principle is not to make uniform the world, but to multiply their own spirit by learning and understanding all other spirits, in order to be just towards all. In his description of Shakespeare, he invokes the idea of the universal man, saying that Shakespeare is like the universal man who understands everyone. He dedicated a series of talks on this topic called Orations on the Universal Man. He presented Jesus Christ as the universal man who transcends local traditions to unite with God and with all men. But also, the universal man is the potential in every man, because each one has a universal destiny and each man's life has universal implications. This idea that he developed of the universal man was to be presented as a contrast to Nietzsche's Superman, the one whose will dominated all others. Unfortunately, his orations on the universal man have not been translated, but his thoughts on the topic are all through his writings. And there are things like this. A man is not that which can be put in a grave, but that which cannot be contained by the universe. To be a man, even a great man, is a small thing. Be ye gods, say the Holy Scriptures. To be a man, this is a small thing. To be gods, this is the greatest of all. I know of no one else who has ever said things like this. They said of him that his black monk's robe, his long black beard, and his dark, living eyes set in an oval Slavic face gave an appearance which contrasted with the conventionally dressed professors and diplomats that he was around, as did his views of the common problems of world peace. These views contrasted with others. His charm, his urbanity of manner, the completeness of his grasp upon international problems only emphasized the difference in his thought. He spoke from a point of view of a civilization in which men are still more important than institutions, and pointed out that peace or war is a matter of the way we think towards each other. He then returned after the war to Serbia, and he was appointed bishop of the old region of Ohrid, which is actually in Macedonia now. It's the historical heart of Slavic Orthodoxy, and he settled into the ancient monastery there and entered into a change in his orientation. There was a deepening of his whole personality as he fully embraced a life of prayer. During this time, he went to Mount Athos every summer on pilgrimage and always went to see St. Silouan of Russia, who was one of the great Athonite elders of our age. This is the period when he entered into sanctity, and you can see it in his writings. There are two publications of his in that point that are really his masterpieces, and the one that's the best known is the Prologue of Ohrid. Now, this is a listing of the lives of the saints for every day. He was updating the Slavic edition of the Lives of the Saints, but it also has poems and reflections, and it's designed to be an introduction into the way of life of sanctity. The other book that he wrote is called Prayers by the Lake, and this is a poetic masterpiece, very intensely beautiful. The first prayer that I'm going to read is like the invocation to a lyric masterpiece. Who is that staring at me through all the stars in heaven and all the creatures on earth? Cover your eyes, stars and creatures. Do not look upon my nakedness. Shame torments me enough through my own eyes. What is there for you to see? A tree of life that has been reduced to a thorn on the road that pricks both itself and others. What else, except a heavenly flame immersed in mud, a flame that neither gives light nor goes out? Plowmen, it is not your plowing that matters, but the Lord who watches. Singers, it is not your singing that matters, but the Lord who listens. Sleepers, it is not your sleeping that matters, but the Lord who wakens. It is not the pools of water and the rocks around the lake that matter, but the lake itself. What is all human time but a wave that moistens the burning sand on the shore and then regrets that it left the lake because it has dried up? O stars and creatures, do not look at me with your eyes, but at the Lord. He alone sees. Look at him, and you will see yourselves in your homeland. What do you see when you look at me? A picture of your exile? A mirror of your fleeting transitoriness? O Lord, my beautiful veil, embroidered with golden seraphim, drape over my face like a veil over the face of a widow, and collect my tears, in which the sorrow of all your creatures seethes. O Lord, my beauty, come and visit me. I want to read one more, and this emphasizes his thought on the universal man. Before all creatures and before all time and sorrow, you, O Lord, formed man in your heart. You conceived of man first, even though you manifested him last in the rosaries of creation. Even as a gardener thinks about the blooming of a rose, all the time he is digging and planting the dry stems. Even as a builder experiences the joy of domes while planning a church, even though he builds them last. You gave birth to man in your heart before you began creating. Help my mortal tongue to name this man, this radiance of your glory, this song of your blessedness. Should I call him the ultimate man? For just as he was contained in your heart, so also was all the manifested world, including man and the heralds of man, contained in his mind. This wonderful period in St. Nikolai's life came to an end with World War II. When the Nazi army invaded, they arrested him and the Patriarch of Serbia because they felt that they would stir up too much resistance to their rule. And he was put in the infamous prison of Dachau for the rest of World War II, and there he suffered until he was rescued by the American army. So he was taken to America, and then after World War II, NATO decided to put Serbia and Romania back into their little boxes of oppression by giving them over to the Soviet rule behind the Iron Curtain. This was one of the few times that he expressed his fury, because this was everything he had worked against as an ambassador. How the great powers carved up the little nations among themselves to exploit them. He knew that he still had a Western audience who remembered him, and he called shame on this behavior. And so, Bishop Nikolai died in exile in America. He settled in the St. Tikhon's Monastery and Seminary in Pennsylvania, and became a mentor and an inspiration to young men preparing for the priesthood in the American Orthodox Church. And it's a good thing that he was there, because he helped the still forming Orthodox Church in America during a very difficult time in its existence, because it was cut off suddenly from its mother church in Imperial Russia, which had supported it so generously. And now the American Orthodox Church was on its own, with the Russians suffering gravely under communist oppression. At the same time, there was a huge flood of refugees from Eastern Europe, driven out by World War and by communist oppression. So St. Nikolai was here at that time, helping the refugees and helping the Orthodox in America find their way in this land. And so he's honored as one of the saints of the Orthodox Church in America. I'm going to end with a brief quote from a work called The Agony of the Church. And in this, he was calling out to all the churches, all the Christian churches, to recognize one another, to see what is good in one another. But really what he was trying to do was to awaken them to the riches and the depth of the Orthodox Church, which was still not very well known. If you ever wondered what an apostle might sound like in our own times, listen to this. The founder of our church embraced all nationalities and races. Christ was put in the center of the world's history. He represented what was best and highest in Eastern and Western thought. The dream of Messiah was the best and highest in the Jewish conception. Well, Jesus was this Messiah. Egypt had an intuition into the mystery of the divinity as a trinity. However rough may have been that idea, the Trinity being thought of as a human family of Father, Mother, and Son still existed very vividly in Egypt, and the people expected the coming of God's only Son, the third person of their Trinity, not an imaginary being like Horus, but the real son of Osiris in flesh and blood, who would bring happiness to men. Well, Jesus of Nazareth was this Son of God, and he as the Christ was the eternal sharer of the divine Trinity. India was the cradle of the teaching of the Incarnation. The supreme God, Brahma, had already been incarnated in many persons since the dawn of history, but the highest incarnation of him was still to come. Well, Jesus Christ was this highest incarnation of Brahma in human shape. The mountainous Asia under Caucasus and Ararat plunged into the mystery of Mithras, which was born out of the Zoroastrian dualistic religion of light and darkness. Well, now Christ, the friend of humanity, revealed himself as the God of light struggling against the enemy of humanity. It is not true that Christ had his prophets among the people of Israel only. His prophets existed in every race and every religion and philosophy of old. That is the reason why the whole world could claim Christ, and he can be preached to everybody and accepted by everybody. Behold, he is at home everywhere. I am Christopher Lewis, and these are Ruminations from Among the Bards.